Good afternoon. Always lovely to try and keep you awake after the carbs hit. I will do my best. Good morning. Afternoon. Hello. We had a faculty meeting this morning. There are a few of them scattered around, so if we look a little dazed, it's because, we were moving the whole faculty. So I was asked to come and give you a little talk about cooperation and collaboration, which is a big part of what I think is successful for any organization. And I have a special place in my heart for school libraries and public libraries, and think that, once again, if we get together, we can collude against the evil academic libraries and assume the place of prominence we truly deserve. I was also asked to give a title, and of course, what you do with a title is you give something cheeky and hope it makes sense. So, how to check out a teacher in a non-creepy way. That's not the real title. This is the real title, which is How a Citizens' Revolution in Egypt led to librarians lending out teachers in Illinois and why it matters to South Carolina school and public libraries cooperating.
I like the first one.
Yeah, you can't tweet this one. So,
Yeah.
so that's what I'd like to talk about today, right? I figure you spent the day and are going to continue to spend the day on some pretty practical ideas, talking about what's going on, different options you can work together. I wanted to give a little bigger perspective because, then I don't have to worry about details and we're all happy. And so I'm going to start. Does anyone ever play Tri-Bond? Yeah? Right? You get two things and you have to figure out the things that connect them. I love this. I sort of think in mind diagrams.
Mind maps?
Mind maps, thank you. Really, mine is not working. I can use a map. And I love the idea of how things connect together. And so sometimes I work with my students and we just sort of have this exercise where we throw out two random nouns and see if we can connect them. And I thought this was always great until one class said, Kentucky Fried Chicken. I said, all right, and Margaret Thatcher. And I went, oh, okay. And it took us a while. And someone said, well, Kentucky Fried Chicken's got the colonel's in the military, the UK is in the military, starts for Margaret Thatcher. I thought, oh, that was good. So I walked away and someone said, oh, that's completely wrong. And I said, oh, yes. They said, it's soft ice cream. And I said, excuse me. So it turns out, many people don't know this, but Margaret Thatcher, before she was a politician, was a chemist. And one of the things that she worked on in chemistry was colloids, which sounds really exciting until you realize that when you get soft ice cream, it's in fact a colloidal combination. And so her work led directly to the creation of soft ice cream, which of course is bad for us, which of course is junk food like Kentucky Fried Chicken. And I thought that was a much better connection. So today I'm going to try and tell you why what happened in Egypt a couple of years ago leads to different levels of collaboration. So this is a picture of what happened in Alexandria, Egypt. And some of you may remember the Arab Spring. And the Arab Spring, which started in actually late 2010, 2011, many people, when we think about or we followed the Arab uprising, the Arab Spring, focused on what happened in Cairo and Tahrir Square and the idea of protesters and all this. But protests were going across the country. And one of the places it was happening was in Alexandria. And Alexandria is the largest port city in Egypt and a huge population. And in Alexandria, they also had uprisings of people talking about how they could, overrun the government, fighting for liberty, fighting for representation, fighting for lots of really wonderful things. And in Alexandria, you may have heard that term before because there is the famous ancient wonder, which is the Library of Alexandria, which is often misunderstood what it is. But there is a new Library of Alexandria built with a couple of $100 million by the Mubarak administration, which of course these folks were not terribly pleased about Mubarak. And something very interesting happened on January 28th at 6 p.m. At 6 p.m., all the police, all the military force, all peacekeeping and Mubarak administration withdrew, leaving the protesters on their own. Now, not only did they withdraw from where the protesters were occurring, it just so happens they also withdrew from all the prisons and opened them all up. And they let rapists and murderers and all sorts of people literally onto the streets. Because they were going to say, if you want unrest, let me show you what unrest really is. So it was meant to derail and delegitimize the protesters. Because what began happening was instantly peaceful protest turned into violent riots. And these folks began doing things like burning down any building or car they could find. And the protesters joined in, and they all took out whatever they felt was associated with the Mubarak regime. They tore down government buildings. They torched police cars. They took out all of these public infrastructure. And at one point, this looting eyed the new Library of Alexandria. Now, the Library of Alexandria had been in existence for about a decade by this point. But Mubarak's wife was on the board. And so everyone began looking and talking about this. And as the looters began moving towards the library, the protesters, the peaceful protesters, began joining hand in hand surrounding the library. Not only that, but it was men and women and children that were holding hand in hand to protect this library. And by the time the protest had ended, by the time Mubarak stepped down, by the time people receded, not a rock was thrown against its wall, and not a window of this library was broken. In the midst of all of this destruction, why did they save the library? Now, there are lots of different things, but some interesting things to note. One, the picture you're looking at, this is a huge, about 30-meter long flag. And so what happened in the midst of the protest is many of the librarians were actually stuck inside the library during the protest. And at one point, the protesters walked up and knocked on the door, which the librarians were kind of like, and they opened the door, and the protesters said, "Is it all right if we put a flag on your step?" And they put this flag, and so every day that the protest occurred, every protester would lay hands on a flag of freedom on the steps of the Alexandria Library as they went to go and reclaim their country. And why, in the end, did they not tear down this library? Because for 10 years, librarians had done their job. Right? Now, it's easy for us to say people in this circumstance, they were exceptional. The problem with calling the librarians here exceptional, they were brave, they were brilliant, they were amazing, but to call them exceptional means that we would expect more out of them than we would expect out of ourselves in this protest. I don't think they were exceptional. I think they were good at their job. Now, I tell this story. And I tell this story when I start, and I have in Syracuse, where I came from, I have about 70 brand new students ready to be librarians, and I tell them this story, and the reaction is always the same, which is instead of standing up and being inspired, they're like, do I have to stand up like that? And that's right. Am I expected, if there's a crisis, to stand up and do this? Am I expected, if all civility disappears, to hang out at the library to make sure the stacks are right? To which we all make this lovely joke and we walk away. Now, where this gets interesting is I did this several years ago, and I had students, and we all laughed, and we moved on. And one of the students that I had in that classroom, his name is Jennifer Alardi. And this is Jennifer Alardi. I know you can't necessarily see her, but she's brilliant and beautiful and wonderful in this point. And Jennifer Alardi was there, but she happened to already be working for a library as a paraprofessional, was there to get her degree. It turns out that her library is in Ferguson, Missouri. And so Jennifer went back all energized and thought that it was great, and then a white cop killed a black kid and they left his body in the street for hours. And Ferguson exploded. Ferguson exploded in large peaceful protest, and then Ferguson exploded in not so peaceful riots, and not only did they call out the police force, I'm sorry you can't see the lights. Is there a way to do the lights here? Because this is worth seeing. This is the Ferguson police force. It turns out there's a program run by the Pentagon where local police forces can buy ex-military gear. And so understand in a moment, or not, that, here we go. These are policemen. These are not military, but they're dressed in SWAT gear and camouflage. Now, as was one put on the Daily Show, if you want to wear camouflage in Ferguson, Missouri, you probably want to dress more like a Walmart than actually camouflage, so I'm not quite sure it was working. But this happened, it exploded. And then the mayor closed all services. And then the governor put a curfew and closed all government services. And they closed the schools. Now, this was right at the beginning of the school year, and so you may sit there and go, so they closed the schools. Well, what happens is, as you know, what do you get in school? You get food for people who are below a certain economic condition. And Ferguson is not a rich area. And so what happened is these kids were up in their houses late at night, which as NPR once described it, where their parents were sitting on a couch with a baseball bat beside them just in case trouble came knocking. At 2 in the morning, listening to gas canisters and rubber bullets being fired, and these kids were hungry. Now, what happened, and we tell this story often, is if we were telling another story, we could talk about Scott Bonner, who was at the Ferguson Public Library, been on the job for about 3 weeks. And he then put out this lovely sign that says, "Stay strong, Ferguson, we're all family." And he invited people to come in, and he invited the schools, and they created a sort of impromptu school. And when they ran out of room in the library, they went to local churches, and it was a really wonderful story. But I want to tell you the story about what happened in the St. Louis County Public Library, which was right down the street and served the same school district, because that's where Jennifer was working as a paraprofessional. Because she woke up in the morning and she said, "I think I'm going to bring pizza today. I'm just going to buy and bring in pizza for anyone because these kids are going to be hungry." And she did. And she set up in an auditorium they had, and she brought in games, and she brought in activities, and she brought these other stuff. And they began serving, once again, the children and families of Ferguson, and the reporters got it, because, hey, the reporters came to tell a story. And when the reporters came in, what they kept saying was, "So you're doing this because there was a gap, right? You did this because no one was stepping up." And Jennifer said, "No, we're doing this because we're a library. This is what we do." "But you're providing food, you're feeding them, and that's new." "Actually, they've been here all summer. We often do free reduced lunches in the public libraries during the summer. That's normal. We just asked them to stay," and they said, "Fine." "Yes, but you're giving them activities and connecting to the museum." "Yeah, we do that all the time because, they're regular partners." And I think, it was a really small article because you could tell the reporter was sort of walking around like this. But my point of this is that Jennifer looked at this, and her folks looked at this, and public librarians looked at this, and they said, yes, school is important. School is part of it. We need to support these communities, and schools represent a real dynamic partnership. But something else happened, which is as Jennifer and I began talking and working on different things, Jennifer realized that what was actually happening in Ferguson, if you put on your pedagogical hat for a moment, kind of sucked. Right? This is the story we don't tell out too loud. But what happened was, yes, they opened classrooms and they brought students in to sit and learn, but what they were doing is handing them out worksheets. They were handing them out drill and kills, right? They were handing out things. And so it wasn't the best pedagogy necessarily. And Jennifer was really bothered by this because she cares a lot about pedagogy. She cares a lot about what kind of instructional activities are we providing to our children in public libraries in general. And what she started doing outside of her regular library is her parents lived just a couple of miles north in a place called Louisiana, Missouri, which is really confusing. And she began a pop-up library in her parents' driveway. And so what happened is the kids that were in that area could come in and she'd do gaming activities and drawing activities and things like that. And so pretty soon, once a month turned into once a week, and people were looking forward to this. And she would talk with the teachers and talk to school librarians and say, what can we do in this? And it became so popular and so important that she went out and created a nonprofit foundation called Simple Positive Play. And Simple Positive Play not only does programming in public libraries, but they now have leased a building in the Ferguson area, and so that they have Saturday activities and evening activities, and they really talked about doing instruction in a constructivist way and talking about manners of engagement. And so the story starts with, you never know when you're going to have, a little minor social disintegration on your hands, and turns into the fact that partnerships are important and vital not only at that point of crisis, but they need to be maintained continuously and constantly. That a good partnership and cooperation isn't a once a year come to the state library and look at each other thing, but a regular ongoing conversation and how we work together. And so these kinds of things about pedagogy and instruction. We know that often in public libraries, we will do activities that don't have a high educational value, but they occupy things. Likewise, we know in school libraries, sometimes we do things. I have my favorite good friend, school librarian, Sue Kowalski, up in Syracuse, has this deal. She says, she comes in and I have her talk to the students. She does amazing stuff, tell you a whole story. She builds an iSchool team out of it. It's incredible. And she says, well, and students will say, well, how do you get teachers to do this? She goes, oh, that's easy. I just start by talking to the teachers who will talk to me. And then I get them lots of students that show them reward. And she's now to the point where she has teachers that she won't work with because they don't know how to do instruction well, which I thought was delightful. Because she'll get this, a teacher will come in, we're going to do history. It's going to be Columbus Day. I want him to come and look up Columbus on the encyclopedia. And she's like, no, that's not good enough. So let's talk about and begin revising instructional outcomes, begin talking about different ways of performing it, talking about the resources they could bring into it, talking about all different ways of other than let's send them to the library to look stuff up. Right? We see that all the time. And what's really amazing is that she's built that collaboration with her students. So she started with some students who would come in like, can I help you? Right? And we all, school librarians, we have the tribe that find us, right? We have the tribe that end up in the school library. And she finally realized she was spending so much time trying to organize and find things for them to do that it was detracting from her job. And she stopped and said, I'm doing this wrong. I need to have them do things, and I can step back and help them if they need it. And so she began with simple things like them shelving. Oh, what happens if a book shows up at the wrong time? It's okay. You know? Or, anyone still have World Book Encyclopedia? Those of you who aren't chuckling haven't realized that they put the letters on the spine and you can rearrange them into whatever words you like. Right? So she had a team that would go and put them back in the right order, or at least do something clever with them. And so they began that, and then she began saying, well, you know, it's topic X month. Why don't you guys put together a display? And the students would put together a display. Why don't you put up a poster for this? And she began giving them different activities to do, and they began taking them on. Even to the point where she would say, it's time to order the materials. Here's the systems. Which books should we order? And they would actually begin putting the orders in. And at one point, she put in the order and she ended up with all these Spanish texts that she didn't ask for. She's like, why did we order this? They go, well, because Sue, you screwed up on the system, what you needed to do. They gave her a tutorial on how to do online ordering. That kind of empowerment turns to the point where now she would have people calling up where she was giving people like 5-minute slots because they wanted to be part of what she called the I team. And it's just 5 minutes. And she'd have parents going, Billy can't make it today for a shift. She's like, it's 5 minutes. I don't care. But, you know, it built this sense of ownership. And what she started to do with the teachers is the teachers would go in and go, well, I want to use technology X in my classroom. And she'd go, well, here's a group of students who know this better than I do. They're going to begin teaching you. And initially, the teachers were like, whoa, no. But then it turned into requests because, as some of my faculty can tell you, they became like graduate assistants, right? It's like, oh, free labor, awesome. And so they began coming in and working on projects, and she became a resource, not just for the materials, but the collaboration and of expertise, and it really changed the nature of what she was doing. And then she began reaching out to public libraries who are doing things as well around the area. So collaboration is an ongoing and constant thing. So the work that she did, I tell this story often, and one of the places I tell it in something called I Lead USA, which South Carolina was a part of. And it's a professional development activity. We build teams of academic and public and school librarians to come together around different projects. And one of the projects was a group called Project Fate, which had the word awesome in it somewhere, like fabulous, awesome, something. And they began talking about how can we build ongoing collaborations, because they kept realizing that we as a school librarian, I kept running into the public librarian and we never knew what each other were doing. Couldn't we fix this? And so one of the things we asked folks to do is we asked them to put together a brief explanatory video of their project. And so I want to show you a portion of their brief explanatory video. So hopefully we can even hear it. She's not flipping you off. Don't worry, you don't have to hear it. It's old-time music. Those are the cool public libraries. The best part, this was all shot in Springfield, Illinois. If you want to talk about a state capital, it's sleepy. There was no one here. So what the project ended up doing was talking about different ways they could build ongoing collaboration. Because not only was it a public library, this is the Evanston area of Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago. Not only did they have public librarians and school librarians, they had special librarians, law librarians, museum librarians, all sorts of folks that they wanted to talk about how they could begin collaborating. And as they looked, and as we look around at means of collaboration, you find really interesting projects. One project, for example, was working on curriculum. So we had a situation, I was in a workshop like this with a bunch of librarians, and we were talking about sort of the moments of confession. And one of the public librarians says, well, we don't let students print out Wikipedia articles. And it's right, you're all right. So every librarian went, oh, censorship, horrible. Wikipedia is not evil, et cetera, et cetera. And so everyone's ready to kill this poor librarian. And she goes, the reason, ... is because if they cite Wikipedia in their articles for school, they will get an F on their exams. So if we facilitated them doing this, we would facilitate them getting an F. Now, the interesting conversation that pursued was, well, that's not a particularly good reason to fail someone, and there's not. And then it turns out, well, we really should have a talk with them in a collaboration, not simply don't print these out. That idea of looking at institutional ways, how do we manage and negotiate different things? We've seen school libraries, particularly in rural communities, that will open extra hours so that they can serve the parents of the students and not just the students themselves. They set up delivery services so they could begin bringing requested materials to drop off at the school library so parents could pick it up and utilize it. That then turned into additional services such as literacy services for the parents as well as literacy services for the children, and it began collecting. So these folks got together, and what they ended up doing was they ended up having dinner once a month, which sounds ridiculously fun, and it was. But that was their project outcome, was dinner once a month. And at the dinner, they would talk and they would socialize and they'd meet and they'd scheme and they came up with ideas. And one of the ideas they came up with was the notion of a teacher checkout. And so what teacher checkout was is that they identified teachers that needed materials on a given instruction, a given curriculum, what have you, that their school library may not have had. They organized the materials, bundled them up, put them on a shelf, and so teachers could literally drive through, pick up their bundle, and walk out without having to worry about finding it, checking it out, overdues and late fees. They made it really quick and easy. Now, this was a cool outcome, and it was interesting. It made them work together. But now what I'd like you to do for a moment is think about how we could take this further. Right? This is all pretty simple stuff. This is collection-oriented. This is the idea of utilizing our materials. But if we talk for a moment about how we push this forward, let's think about teacher checkout in a whole different way. What if instead of talking about making it easier for teachers to check stuff out, we made it easier to check out the teachers? So you guys, I'm sure, don't have this situation, but if you have children, and if your children take math in school, you may have realized that we've broken math. I say that because I know damn well what 4 divided by 2 is, and I don't need a number line to tell me, right? So I'd have my 8-year-old, and there's nothing more embarrassing than an 8-year-old asking you to help you with their 8-year-old math homework, and you're like, I don't know. What's 4 divided by 2? 2. How do you know that? Because it's 2. How did you arrive at that answer? Watch. 2. Show your work. 2. Do you do the loop or not? Anyway. And so we had this situation all the time, right? So math is weird now, and I get it. The idea of number lines get the spatial recognition that they attach to number theory. I get it. It's beautiful. But preparing, yeah. But by the way, we're currently having a debate about whether undergraduates in information science need calculus, and I'm sitting there going, I hope not. they may be showing up to take mine back. Yeah. And so, but imagine if you could literally check out the math teacher and go, right? Some time that we could sit there and talk about what the curriculum is. And in New York, I know you guys don't have Common Core. You have Carolina Core, which looks remarkably like Common Core. I guess it's with the Southern accent. So we have Common Core, and we don't like it. And so we've had a situation where we had 11% of students be withdrawn from state testing as a protest of Common Core evaluations, assessment, etc. But imagine sitting down and talking about, all right, what is this curriculum? What is the point? How can you help me as a parent participate in the education system? Talk to me what your goals and objectives are. Now, we do that by coming into the schools and we have open houses. I get that. But that notion of sort of on demand being able to do that, or finding ways that people may not want to come into the school, or may see increasingly the school as a political environment and may see the public library as a neutral environment, this is something we could begin to talk about. And so this is, by the way, a picture from Human Libraries. If you haven't seen them, they're fabulous ideas where you can check out. This is probably someone to talk about. I'm sorry?
It's a person.
Yeah, it's a person. You can check out a person. You can check out lawyers, and you can check out policemen. You can check. This is probably someone who's working with care dogs and service dogs. I've seen a community college just brilliantly, and you can actually check out the president of the college, which I think is wonderful. Like the faculty lined up for that one. But these are all different folks that can talk about it, and the notion of bringing expertise from your community in. So you can bring in tutors, you can bring in your teachers, you can bring in different academics, and the students can participate in this as well. The idea of doing a check, instead of career day where people come in and give you their 5-minute presentation, which no one does anymore, but that idea that you can begin to check out people with different vocations, different professions, different connections. We've seen with virtual technology that idea of arranging virtual book talks, but that idea of being able to check out authors, particularly local authors, working with local authors to get information out about their books, their materials, their process. So if we begin to talk about ongoing constant collaboration where we can work and do what we're expected, but begin to look at the community as our collection and not the materials and stuff that we've collected to help the community, things begin to change. Right? Now what happens is if someone comes in and they want to help, we can start to figure it out. Right? So public librarians, you guys, school librarians, you have this too, right? It's less and less because luckily they're dying off and decaying. The National Geographic problem, right? They're still finding, it's like finding radon or finding asbestos in a house. I mean, it's just the same level of a plague that someone discovers up in the attic. Oh, dear God, it's a lifetime collection of National Geographics. Quick, get me a librarian. Because we know how to abate that problem, which is to shred them. But that idea of how can we look at communities and collections. So if someone came into you and they said to a public library, school library, I have this great book. I think you should be part of the collection. You would know what to do with that. But you would know. Right? You have a process. You have a policy. No one thinks it's weird. Someone sitting at the reference desk doesn't think that's odd. A school librarian who gets requests for materials, we get those. And we process in policy and, eventually we wrap them in plastic and put stickers on them and hope for the best. But what happens if you have an engineer who walks up and says, use me. How can I help? How can I be part of this? That's weird, right? Because then it's, let me find the director so I don't have to talk to you, right? or how did you get into this school? Because I have reporting obligations, That idea of how do we take that kind of expertise on a regular basis and make it available? I mean, imagine in a classroom if a teacher is teaching something around South Carolina history, right? So I have an 8th grader. He's learning South Carolina history. I had no idea, for example, that rice was the major crop that built South Carolina plantations and such before cotton, etc. Do we have a historian? Can we make that available? I'm a professor of history. I'm in the food agriculture business, what have you. Imagine that as part of your collection within a school. So when a teacher says, we're doing a unit on, do you have stuff to help me out? You can say, yes, I've got this materials and I got this reading and I got these 3 people that I've talked to and they're really great and they can work with kids. And by the way, they can't come in, no problem, we'll stipend them. We'll bring them in on video. And then being able to do the same thing at the public library. So they said, oh, they're doing a unit on South Carolina history. Well, why don't we have the same thing going on so we can have local authors come in and we'll grab people from the university or we'll grab people from whatever it is, the local historical society, and we'll have people that organize sessions and put things together. That notion of beginning to move from the stuff to help the people to the people to help the people. And what happens is we begin to build collaborations. Now, whenever I say this, invariably what will snake up is, why would they want to do that? How much is it going to cost me, and are you insane? Little things like that. One of the things that we have to realize that part of bringing to a collaboration is that you have something to offer. What is it that, why would people want to work with me? What are they going to get out of it? So there was a situation back in Chicago. Chicago Public Library, a group approached them, I believe from Carnegie Mellon. They received a grant to create a youth center, in essence, a creation space. Early sense of a maker space, but this was more digital content creation than necessarily physical collection, but certainly of the And Chicago Public Library thought this was great. They looked around and they found an old closet, literally an old closet, about this big. And they cleaned it out, and they said, all right, go do what you want to it. And so they began designing, they began laying out all these researchers in education and constructivism and content creation. And they came up with this great idea, and they laid out the plans in front of the librarians, and the librarians looked at it and said, well, where are the books? Now, the researchers tracked me down at a conference. They said, the books are out there, whatever it is, what's going on? Why do they want this stuff? And I said, well, what they're saying is, where are we? But unfortunately, they've been told for so long that their value is in the materials they offer and not the skills and expertise that they have, that the only way of saying, where am I, is to say, where are the books? Because what the researchers said, I want them in here. I need someone to help them work through a problem and do an information literacy cycle. I need them to help them figure out how to share materials, understand its impact. I need your librarians. I don't need their books. Because they're in the middle of a library. There are books. I need them. And so what we began finding all too often is that librarians began investing our value in the materials we offer and not in our ability to organize, select those materials, and to have nothing to do with materials at all. The true collection of any library is the community it serves, not the tools that we use to serve it out. Think about your community, and that could be the most rural community you want. You have people who are expert in the original maker agriculture, the idea of having lawyers, having doctors, having craftsmen, having people who work with their hands, having farmers, having plumbers, having all these other folks. Imagine sharing that expertise amongst themselves. And why would they want to? Because if you ever ask anyone what their passion is, they will tell you. Oftentimes to the point where you must sneak out of the room because you're tired of hearing about it, but they will tell you. And what you're going to do is their public library, which by the way has a better brand identification than Coke and Apple, as love and identity and positive connection, you are about to anoint them as a product and part of your library. And while you look at that as, oh, why would they want to work here because, our coffee's really horrible and long hours, they look at it as what a prestigious institution. Call them a fellow, a library fellow, a school library fellow, a public library fellow, whatever. They'll take the title and they'll put it on their CV. Because what you're giving them is value. What you're giving them is recognition. And for that, they will participate. A library in Pistoia, Italy, right outside of Florence. Public library. They, on a weekend, will have 50 different programs going on in that library. They have an FTE of 5. How do 5 people do 50 programs? That's not by running quickly. They have social workers come in. They have bricklayers come in. They literally have iron workers come in. They have people showing movies. They're the ones who run the programs, who make the programs happen. And once again, people will often say something to the effect of, but Dave, what happens if no one comes? And I say, this would be the first library program you've ever given where no one's come. Right? But the answer is, if I invite you and I say, I'm going to do a program, it's all set, you show up on Tuesday night, you get ready to talk, let me go take care of it for you. And you show up on Tuesday night and no one's there, whose fault is it? On the other hand, if I say, what do we want to do? You think Tuesday night's good? Yeah, I think Tuesday night. And no one comes, whose fault is it? No one's, or both of us. How can we make it better? What's the next step? They're invested in that process. Right? So what I want you to do for a minute, how much time do we have? Stand up. All right. Pick a partner. for my bananas. Yes, I've seen the Minions movie. I can only now say banana. Banana. Who found that hard to do? You. Right? Who found that really easy to do? Who found it embarrassingly familiar? You have a passion, you have a topic, you're willing to share it, you're willing to talk about it, and frankly, mostly it makes you feel good. Now, I know that some of us, the classic introvert, we don't like talking in public and such, but have you ever noticed that there are certain things that you are introverted about and certain things that you aren't? Right? Introvert and extrovert is not some sort of universal state, it's a contextual decision you make. What is your level of comfort? What is your level of ownership? Right? Imposter syndrome. Oh, maybe someday they'll figure out I can't be a librarian, right? Versus I got this down. Right? That passion that you were able to identify by a crazy person in South Carolina forcing you to make the shape of a banana, you were able to on the spot share and begin to discuss. Everyone has one of those. The idea of taking those and sharing them and making them available in the public sphere, in the library sphere, in the school sphere, that's resources that we can tap on. And by tapping on those collaborative resources, by giving people a stage and a forum by which they can share their passions. By the way, lots of more issues to talk about. Quality, do they know what they're talking about? Is it safe? I get that. But if you start with the concept that my community of students, my community of teachers, my community of patrons, my community of board members, my community of librarians, if you start with the assumption that they have a passion they are willing to share, and that there is value in them sharing them, you change how you begin to plan collaboration. Right? So another library, Fayetteville Free Library outside of Syracuse, New York, they realized that, as we most do, that we have a problem with women in STEM, and that is if you look at interest by third graders, male and female both identify high desire to go into STEM disciplines, and by 10th grade, there is a very high positive report among male students and a very low report among female students. Decided not to simply sit back and go, isn't that interesting? But put together a Geek Girls Summer Camp where they invited girls to come in and engage in STEM activities. I mean, it was brilliant. I mean, they build trebuchets, right? That's like catapults, but with counterweights. And so, like, at one point, people were complaining about, isn't it kind of noisy in a library? Just people walking with their books and stacks of things flying up there. It was fabulous. They brought in a whole cement truck's worth of a non-Newtonian fluid. What is that? Is it baking? It's
neither a solid.
Oh, yeah. Is it baking soda and water? Or cornstarch and water, right? So if you slap it, it acts as a solid. If it goes slow, it's a liquid. They set it out. They made like a sidewalk and had everyone run across it. They had a female fighter pilot come in and talk about what it meant to be in the military, a mother and a woman, right? But what was amazing about it is they didn't go out and pay a bunch of people or find some local service. That fighter pilot lived in the neighborhood. The engineers that helped them build the trebuchet were in the neighborhood. So what happened is after that week, if there was interest sparked, if they were building community in a way that those girls could see others in their community in their daily life that could begin to represent and model and be part of that. Right? It's the same thing. So imagine, here's the other one, and I'm almost out of time, right? I love this picture for so many reasons. I love this picture because that is a really old keyboard and it shows you the dangers of clip art. But this kid's just looking at you like, what? Right? This is awesome, right? We had a lovely, have you guys had the safety discussion in school, the internet safety discussion in school? In Syracuse, in JD, we had it where the police officer comes in and tells you how 10-year-olds are sexting. Right? And so everyone's just walking out of that meeting going, we're doomed, we're doomed, we're doomed. Right? And he's like mentioning app names, and you're just sitting in the app store going, oh, please, God, I have no idea. Snap, what? What? You know, and it's a calculator, and it has porn. Ah! Well, imagine that the kids, they know more about this than we do. Well, imagine if you had as a school library, you had a partnership with the public library where you had the kids do demos and videos and explain the technology. Trust me, they don't get the fact that they're screwing themselves in the long run. It's fine. And these guys become the tutors for the larger community. What the parents realized is they were paying for internet modems to provide access to things they were scared of and they never had training in. Did you know that there's filtering if you want to? Do you know that these are ways you can observe? These are things to look at. Having the students be part of the informing process so that they're preparing the materials and training that the public library is disseminating for people interested in that topic. They get the ownership and they get to see they're important, they are valued, they have a passion, and you're allowing them to do it. And parents are learning what's going on from the people who know it and are utilizing it. That's the difference between, oh, we better buy a book on cyberbullying really quickly. Oh, we better go buy some worksheets that we can give out. As opposed to, here's some stories of kids that were cyberbullied. Here's the stories of the technology and how it's utilized and what's going on and watch out for this and watch out for that. That's the idea of building collaboration based on people's aspirations and passions, not on their deficits and skills. Right? If I invited you in because you're dumb in the internet, is very different than I can say how to make you an even better parent. Right? That's the kind of positive collaboration we need. And so, coming back to that really long title, how did this all fit together? A citizens' revolution in Egypt led us to understand that people have value and see libraries of all sorts as powerful by them doing their job of connecting to their community. What happened after the Arab Spring, what happened after the revolution, before the next Arab Revolution, what happened was suddenly taxi workers and mothers were flocking into the Alexandria Library to learn what Facebook was, to learn what Twitter was, because they'd suddenly been freed because of this and they wanted to come and learn how it worked. The best internet connection in all of Alexandria is in the library. The best internet connection in many of our rural communities is in the schools and the libraries. We have the ability to connect people through that technology and starting businesses to learning what's going on to parenting, etc. And what we learn from that is when people are inspired, that when they don't expect it, they may be called upon to go way beyond what they thought was their job. And I'm sitting in Colombia just about a year from when we faced a major catastrophe around flooding, around how do we deal with power and water without a leak. We weren't trained in that. And as librarians, we weren't trained in that. But what we did, I'm sorry, I'm taking credit, what you guys did is FEMA, when they showed up to begin helping, set up in public libraries because they were community hubs, they were places to connect. They could go to schools where they could provide food and water and materials. We are necessary infrastructures in times of great need, economic need, disaster need, what have you. And what we've seen is it starts around learning, that at times of great crisis, what often people are looking for is knowledge as much as they are some other form of relief. After 9/11, I ran a service called Ask Eric. It answered questions of educators in classrooms. Number one question we received from educators across the country after 9/11, what is Islam, what is Muslim? Right? It wasn't what happened here or what the figures were or whatever. It was, we were hearing this whole new language, we don't know what to do, it's coming into our classroom, how do we know it? What are the events that you want to be prepared for in the classroom and in the public library, working together to educate families and grand families and extended families in understanding that? And what we know is it's about learning. And learning is participatory, it's interactive, and it's ultimately people talking to people. And so that means that you begin to look at teachers not simply as instruments, but as experts that you can share. As engineers and people within your community is part of that collection. And it happened in Illinois, but it matters because it can happen and does happen in South Carolina. It happens in rural South Carolina, it happens in Columbia, it happens in Charleston. There's nothing that prevents it. We were just having a discussion outside. You can be a one-person library and look at it as, oh, I don't have the time and resources to do all this. Or you can say, my job isn't to make it happen. My job is to help other people make it happen. Right? I have a connection to my community. You know the history. We've seen public libraries and school libraries team where what they do is they take elders of a community on bus tours through the city and they generate oral histories as part of, well, that building used to be that building. Used to happen over here. And, oh, remember that store that was here? And students can take those oral histories and build it into classwork. They can build it into materials and projects. And public libraries can build it into local history collections and share it out. And then we can all share it together and begin sharing it out past our South Carolina borders. And we can begin to look at libraries as hubs for people to learn, whether it's in school, whether it's in the university, whether it's in Main Street, doesn't matter. Why do we collaborate, and why is it essential that school librarians collaborate with public librarians? Because we're in the same business, learning. And we know stuff about learning. And learning happens in the classroom, and it happens at 4 in the morning. Learning happens by what's going over the radio and what you're reading. Learning happens by people doing 3D printing and by people growing plants outside. This whole discussion about how libraries are changing. I was in a school library. They were working with their engineering students, once again at a high school level. They were building a hydroponics lab in the library. So you go into the library to not only get books and materials to nourish your brain, but food and fresh vegetables to nourish your body. Right? That kind of collaboration. And then there was a public library that would loan out gardening spots. So that people who had lived in apartments, people who never knew gardening, it's not like, well, here's one on how to garden. It's like, there's a shovel, there's water, and here's some people who are master gardeners who can help you. That kind of connection is amazingly powerful. And if we can make that connection across an entire state between how we improve our education and learning womb to tomb, imagine the capabilities and possibilities that we have as a state. And that's the importance of what we're talking about. Those specifics of reading programs that are about a bus and giving out books, that's a start. All right? Cocky Reading Express is going to show and motivate all your kids with a mascot. What are you going to do next? What are you going to say? By the way, isn't that really cool that that's a college mascot? Have you ever thought about going to college? Oh, here's what college readiness looks like, and here are the courses offered and AP courses. And now we can connect to the idea of you never went to college. By the way, here's ways you can continue your education, or here's ways that you can get additional support and aid and bring it together. What we do is we transform lives. We transform lives if they're 8 years old. We transform lives if they're 80. We help people become the best of what they see of themselves, and it is a noble profession. Those books, those materials, the shelving, the steel, the lighting, they're a pale flicker of what the true knowledge is in any community, which is the people, which is what they understand and what they know. And will they ever agree? No, they'll never agree. But to know how to have the conversation and engage in a civil way, that's our job. To provide a platform for people to learn and move ahead and know. That's our job. And our job is to be the Velcro connecting that museum, that school, that library, connecting the local Chamber of Commerce and the Arts Council, connecting the literacy efforts, connecting the food programs, connecting social services with philanthropic organizations, with businesses. That's our job. And we don't do that job by staying in a building, looking at our own materials and hoping for the best. We only do it by standing up, joining hands, and reaching out to our communities to join us as part of that as well. And we're all going to be part of making that happen. That's my job. That's my faculty's job. That's my alumni's job. That's my students' jobs. And that's your jobs. And we're all in together. So whatever I can do to make that happen, whatever I can do to be part of it. I got a car. I got GPS. I can find you. You have a board that is giving you crap, I can find them. Right? If you have a board that's great and needs a pat on the back, I can be there in a Skype second. That's the kind of commitment that we have, because ultimately the School of Library and Information Science isn't that way. It's right here. And you're all part of it, whether you're my alums or not. I don't care, I'm claiming it. Right? And I'm not even asking you for money. But that's what we're going to do, is move this profession forward, one expert at a time, one life change at a time. Is that right? All right, let's get to it. I have a few minutes, if you're okay with this. Thoughts, mints, throwing things at me? Yes, Jennifer.
One of the questions that popped into my mind during the Arab Spring you were telling us about was that people were going to the library to find out what is Facebook, what is Twitter, that sort of thing. Did the librarians know, or was that sort of thing censored before the Arab Spring? How did they handle that?
So what you found was after the Arab Spring had occurred is when they started coming in. So
right.
And the answer is the librarians learned really quickly. Right? So My mentor is a fellow by the name of Mike Eisenberg. Some of you may know him. And he once coined the term, he called it the anti-field of dreams model. That is, the field of dreams, build it and they will come. He was like, just put something up and then rush like hell when they ask for stuff. I mean, I don't think he put it any more eloquently than that. So, but honestly, that idea of that we have to know it all and be trained is one of the problems that we as a profession have to get way over. I'll give you an example. STEM education, public libraries and STEM education. We're all going to be about STEM education. We're going to go to public libraries. Let's all do STEM education. Do you know what percentage of Masters of Library Science students have any background or degree in STEM education? One, right? Actually, by the way, one of my favorite students who's now in the library had a background in astrophysics, and I was like, awesome. Yeah? All right. If we only teach what we know, we will create people who look exactly like us, which, by the way, as a profession, tend to be very female and white and middle class, as another issue. Engaging the diversity of interest, of expertise, of skills, of views, of everything, and making that available to the community is much more important than us being a gatekeeper to that. And we have to get really comfortable. How many people feel that every book in your collection, you stand behind 100%? Right? It's like the Star Wars line. What is it about Mos Eisley Space Station? Never has there been a more vile den of iniquity or something like that. There's no greater source of lies and misinformation than a really good academic library, right? We have stuff that we know counters our views, disagrees with each other, etc. Our communities are the same way. We should be just as comfortable with that level of ambiguity and dialogue as we are with the materials that we grant. So having people come in and working with them. But this is also, if the communities are collection, we also do collection development. You want to give a talk on this thing, and I can't hear you and I'm standing right in front of you. Maybe we could team you with someone else who knows about presentation skills. Or we had a teacher come in, she goes, I really want to talk about pre-literacy. I want to talk about how early development, kids need to get basic concepts of literacy, like this word has this sound, has this motion. And, oh, you're a teacher, why don't you teach a class? She goes, I teach all day, I don't want to do any more. So instead what she did was she put together checkoutable bundles that had a board book, a lesson plan, and a toy that went with it. So motion, book, whatever. That was her contribution. We've had people that come in and their background actually is in science, and they work in the maker space where they do 3D, this is how 3D printing goes, etc. In the Fayetteville Free Library, you have an adult in the makerspace who creates a prototype for their engineering. They walk it over to the teen space where the teens use a production studio to put an online Indiegogo ad about how they can seek funding of it, and the library provides the infrastructure and tools to do it. Right? That's a community working itself. The library also has it had 8 different computerized sewing machines. The librarians were terrified of the sewing machines. If the 3D printer broke, they were there in a second. Oh, the heater, the head's wrong, and we got to pull it right. If the sewing machine, they're like, I'm out. Right? And so what did they do? They invited in sewers from the community who would have the workshops and would mentor and bring people in. And at one point, one of these lovely, lovely people said, I don't think the librarians know much about these sewing machines. And not getting the point that was the point she did. Right? And so your point is well taken, which is what then do we as librarians need to be prepared for? And a lot of it is how to help people learn, which we use lots of things like we help them find information. We help them encounter and engage materials to learn. Right? So we can learn a lot in the public library sector about pedagogy, constructivism, how you organize and pace and sequence curriculum. And school librarians can learn a lot about on-demand inquiry and the idea of following people's passions down topics as opposed to what a curriculum says, right? We have the most amazing, this is the point of collaboration. For many, the school library program in a K-12 environment is the necessary slack in our curriculum, right? We are pounding requirements and standards and outcomes into every level of our classroom to the point where our teachers are choked. They don't have a spare second to apply to anything else. And then why does the tribe show up in the school library? Because they get in and then suddenly, I can learn about snails? And they can, right? So we can talk about, well, what do you do and how do you build on that? What's the reference interview look at instruction? It's a beautiful collaboration. And by the way, I'm going to call up. So tonight when you go to the public library, I'm going to call ahead and let them know that they got to have the snail book ready. Imagine that to a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old who suddenly says, your question is valuable. Right? It's back to that value. I'm sorry, that was a long way to go for that answer.
That was a great answer. Thank you.
Please.
A bit of a loaded question, but I have to ask you. At the same time that I'm in love with this profession, I'm also terrified of it. Because I'm in the life program now, and I have this abiding feeling that when I graduate from this program, will I find a job description that fits the passion? And if I do, will there not be 700 people more qualified and knock me out of my chance of contribution? So my question to you is, as someone who only cares about partnership, and that's the entire reason I got into the profession, how do you begin making contributions in spite of having a job?
A couple of things, talk student-wise, but let's just talk in general about one of the great parts of librarianship is that it's what I call a passion plus profession. If you go in to become an accountant, your creativity with numbers is not rewarded that often. But here, coming from a background in science, coming from a background in writing, coming from a background in partnerships, what have you, you bring those skills and librarianship helps you amplify them. What that means is wherever you can demonstrate the amplification is important. That is a really crappy answer, so let me try again. When you apply for a job, there are going to be 50 different things, and they're all going to have the exact same thing in common. They're all going to have a Master's of Library Science. How do you set yourself apart? The short answer is you demonstrate your passion and how you brought librarianship to make it happen, whether that's on a blog, whether that's on a portfolio you put together. Whether, I had a student who loved NASCAR, and he wanted to be the NASCAR librarian, which, by the way, I should be careful, there wasn't one. And what he did was he started building the NASCAR library on his own on the library, and he got people coming, all these NASCAR freaks. When he showed up his first job, he said, all right, why should I invest this community that I built into your institution? Now, that's the arrogant way of saying it. He was much more diplomatic. But that idea of demonstrating that before you even show up in the classroom is part of it as well. If you run into a place that says, I don't care, can you catalog, right? You begin to, and this is easy for me to say, you begin to say, is this the place I want to be? Remember, a job interview is two ways. You're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. And what we all have to do is become allies to this to say, look, you're not crazy. Partnership, and by the way, the ALA theme last year was Libraries Transform with Sari Feldman. This year, it's the expert in the library, which is all about expertise in libraries. In years before that, it was community. Public libraries and school libraries are very much now about connection and communication skills and not about traditional do you know mark and here are 3 records, can you catalog them today. There's still those positions that are important, but even those positions start with how do you know that cataloging the book is a pre-factual reference check. In essence, how are people going to look for that material? That means you need to know the community you're talking to. So how do you demonstrate that? You demonstrate that through portfolios. You demonstrate that through internships and projects. You demonstrate that so that these folks become your recommenders so that when people call them up, they go, oh, are you lucky? Because here's someone who can go into your community and really begin to energize them. And you have, these days, a nice piece of academia and literature and best practices to show community-based oriented librarianship in academic, in public, in school, in medical. This is the trend, and those are the skills you need. So everything's going to be different, but my short answer is if you are going to sell yourself on partnerships, start partnering. And partnerships require documentation in the form of portfolio, in the form of projects, a space online that you can demonstrate them, etc. And you're in our program?
Yeah.
My office is right there. And I am more than welcome to come in. Let's talk. Let's see what we can do. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. I appreciate your time.